The dust settled around Commander Vex Lr's boots as he stepped into the ancient chamber. His team had been digging for 3 weeks on this dead world, at the edge of known space. The planet had no name in Krelith records, just a designation. Sector 447b. It was a barren rock now, but the sensors showed something massive buried beneath the surface. The Krelith Dominion prided itself on collecting knowledge from dead civilizations. Vex Lar had led dozens of expeditions like this, uncovering ruins and forgotten technologies, but nothing had prepared him for what lay in this chamber. The structure was enormous. It stood 50 meters tall and just as wide, a perfect circle of dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The surface was covered in symbols that glowed faintly with residual power. Vexlar had never seen anything like it in all his years of archaeological work. His scanner readings made no sense. The metal predated any known galactic civilization by thousands of cycles. Whatever species built this had mastered technologies the Krelith were only beginning to understand. Scholar Nimra approached the control console beside the structure. She was the best archaeologist in the Dominion, specializing in ancient languages and technology. Her fingers moved carefully over the panel, wiping away millennia of accumulated dust. The console hummed to life under her touch, responding to her careful manipulations. Data began flowing across the screen in languages she had never encountered. But one thing was clear. This was a portal, a gateway to somewhere else, and it had been deliberately shut down. The team worked for hours accessing the database. The alien systems were complex but logical. Nimra found files containing images of bipedal creatures standing upright on 2 legs. They had no natural armor, no claws, no visible weapons. Their skin looked soft and vulnerable. The creatures appeared weak compared to most sentient species the Krelith had encountered, but the military files told a different story entirely. These creatures called themselves humans, and they had fought a war that consumed entire sectors of space. Vex Lar studied the records with growing fascination. The humans had been part of an ancient coalition, fighting an enemy known only as the Devourers. The war had lasted over 200 years. Billions had died. Entire star systems had been sterilized. The humans had fought with a ferocity that seemed at odds with their fragile appearance. Their ships were powerful, their weapons devastating, their tactics brilliant. When the Devourers were finally defeated, the coalition had turned on itself. Old rivalries and territorial disputes erupted into new conflicts. The humans had made a choice then. According to the records, they withdrew from the war-torn sectors through a network of portals they controlled. They sealed the gateways behind them with warnings carved in stone and metal. Nimra found the warning message in the database. It had been translated into 17 different languages, including ancient Krelith. The humans wanted to make absolutely certain that anyone who found these portals would understand the message. Vexlar read the words carved into the portal's archway. They were simple and direct. This gate is sealed by human command. We withdraw to rebuild. We will return. Do not follow. Do not wait. Do not be here when we come back. The timestamp on the message made his blood run cold. 12,000 cycles had passed since the humans carved this warning. 12,000 cycles since they had sealed the portal and vanished from known space. The implications were staggering. The humans had built a portal network spanning multiple galaxies. They had technology far beyond anything the current galactic civilizations possessed. They had fought wars on a scale that made modern conflicts look like minor skirmishes, and then they had simply left, warning everyone to stay away until they returned. Vex Lar had to report this immediately to the High Council. The transmission reached the Dominion homeworld within hours. The High Council convened an emergency session to discuss the findings. Vex Lar presented his data to the assembled counselors, showing them the images and records recovered from the ancient database. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some counselors were fascinated by the discovery and wanted to learn more. Others were cautious, arguing that the warning should be respected. High Counselor Zephyrim led the cautious faction. reminding everyone that they knew nothing about these humans, or what they were capable of. But Counselor Dravix saw opportunity where others saw danger. He was ambitious and hungry for glory. He argued that 12,000 cycles was an eternity. If the humans had survived, they would have returned by now. The portal network represented the greatest discovery in Krelith history. Beyond those sealed gates lay entire galaxies of abandoned civilizations, ancient technologies, and untold resources. The Dominion would be fools to ignore such opportunities based on an ancient warning from a species that was probably extinct. The debate lasted for days. Zephyrim warned that the humans had clearly been powerful enough to build portals across galaxies. Their technology was advanced beyond current understanding. Their military records showed capabilities that seemed impossible. Perhaps the warning should be taken seriously. But Dravix was persuasive. He painted pictures of wealth and knowledge waiting just beyond the portal. He spoke of the glory that would come to the Dominion for unlocking such secrets. He reminded the Council that the Krelith had encountered many dead civilizations in their explorations. Why would these humans be any different? The vote was close, but Dravix won. The High Council authorized a research outpost around the portal. Scientists were dispatched to study the structure and learn its secrets. Vexlar was ordered to remain on site and oversee the operation. He felt uneasy about the decision but followed his orders. Within 2 cycles, the Krelith scientists had restored power to the ancient portal. They studied its construction, analyzed its energy patterns, and deciphered its operating principles. The technology was remarkable, using principles of physics that the Krelith had only theorized about. When they finally activated the portal, the structure came to life with blinding light. Energy swirled within the circular frame, creating a stable gateway to somewhere else. The scientists sent probes through, and the data that came back was extraordinary. The first probe transmitted images of an empty star system, rich with processed metals and abandoned infrastructure. There were no signs of current habitation, just ruins of ancient cities and the skeletal remains of massive space stations. The humans were gone, but they had left behind a treasure trove of technology and resources. The High Council authorized further exploration. More probes were sent through to other systems connected by the portal network. Each one showed similar results: abandoned worlds, ancient technology, and no signs of the humans who had built it all. Counselor Dravix pushed for a manned expedition. The exploration vessel Dawn's Promise was prepared, carrying a crew of 50 under Captain Relvan's command. Their mission was to map the portal network, catalog resources, and establish forward bases for future colonization. Vexlar watched the ship disappear through the portal. He thought about the warning carved into the archway. The humans had been very specific in their message. They said they would return. They told others not to be here when they came back. But 12,000 cycles was a long time. Perhaps Dravix was right. Perhaps the humans were truly gone. And their warning was just the empty threat of a dying civilization. Vexlar hoped so, because the Dominion was now committed to exploring what lay beyond the portal. For better or worse, the Krelith had chosen to ignore the ancient warning and see what secrets the human network held. The reports from Dawn's Promise were extraordinary. Captain Relvan and his crew had found paradise beyond the portal. The human network connected dozens of star systems, each containing worlds that showed signs of advanced civilization. Some planets were already terraformed, with breathable atmospheres and fertile soil. Others held vast deposits of rare minerals that the Krelith needed for their growing empire. Ancient shipyards floated in orbit around dead worlds, their docking bays still containing partially constructed vessels using technology centuries ahead of current designs. Counselor Dravix presented the findings to the High Council with barely contained excitement. He showed images of abandoned cities, with buildings that touched the clouds. He displayed readings of energy sources that produced power without fuel. He talked about medical facilities with equipment that could cure diseases the Krelith had struggled with for generations. All of this was just sitting there, waiting to be claimed. The humans had left it all behind when they sealed the portals and vanished into the unknown. High Counselor Zephyrim remained cautious despite the tempting discoveries. He reminded the council about the warning. The humans had specifically said they would return. They had told others not to be here when they came back. That suggested they expected to find these systems empty when they returned. But Dravix dismissed these concerns. 12,000 cycles had passed. If the humans were coming back, they would have done so by now. The warning was ancient history, carved by a civilization that no longer existed. The High Council voted to establish colonies in the human network. It was a decision that would change Krelith history forever. Within 10 cycles, 17 colonies had been founded on worlds beyond the portal. Mining operations extracted precious metals from asteroid fields. Research teams studied the abandoned technology, trying to understand the principles behind human engineering. The Krelith economy boomed as resources flowed back through the portal. New technologies were adapted from human designs, advancing Dominion science by decades. The colonies grew rapidly. Families moved through the portal seeking new opportunities. Cities rose on worlds that had been empty for millennia. The Krelith brought their culture and civilization to systems that had known only silence since the humans left. Counselor Dravix became a hero to his people. He was praised for his vision and courage. Statues were erected in his honor. He was mentioned as a candidate for High Counselor when Zephyrim eventually retired, but not everyone shared the enthusiasm. Commander Vexlar continued studying the human database at the portal site. The more he learned about the humans, the more concerned he became. The military records showed a species that never gave up. They had fought the Devourers for 200 years despite suffering catastrophic losses. Their tactics evolved constantly. Their technology improved with each generation. When they finally won, they had weapons capable of destroying entire star systems. Vexlar found records of something the humans called the Exodus Accords. It was an agreement made among the human leaders after the war ended. They recognized that they had become too dangerous, too efficient at destruction. The war had changed them in ways they found disturbing. So they made a collective decision to withdraw from the war-torn sectors. They would seal the portals and return to their home galaxies. They would spend time rebuilding not just their civilization but their values. They would remember what they were fighting for instead of just how to fight. The accords included specific provisions about the sealed sectors. No ships were to enter. No colonies were to be established. The sectors were to remain empty until humanity returned. Any species that violated these terms would face the full might of the human fleet. The humans had broadcast these terms across all known space before they left. They had given fair warning. Then they sealed the portals and disappeared. Vexlar tried to share his findings with the High Council, but his concerns were dismissed. The colonies were thriving. The economy was growing. The Krelith people were happy with their new prosperity. No one wanted to hear warnings about an ancient threat that might never materialize. Dravix publicly mocked Vexlar's caution, calling him a coward who saw danger in shadows. The commander's reputation suffered. He was removed from the Portal Research Project and reassigned to routine administrative duties. The colonies continued expanding. By the 20th cycle, over 1 million Krelith lived in the human network. New portal connections were discovered, opening access to even more systems. The Dominion encountered other species in the abandoned sectors. Small civilizations had emerged in the millennia since the humans left. Some were primitive, barely achieving spaceflight. Others were more advanced but still far behind Krelith technology. All were easily absorbed into the growing Dominion Empire. Captain Relvan commanded the flagship Dominion's Pride, patrolling the colonies and protecting Krelith interests. His fleet had grown to include 20 warships, all equipped with weapons reverse-engineered from human technology. The captain felt confident in his abilities. He had fought pirates and rival species. His victories had earned him commendations. He believed the Dominion fleet could handle any threat that might emerge from the abandoned sectors. The survey ship, Brightness of Discovery, was mapping its 43rd system when everything changed. The crew detected an unusual vessel moving between the outer planets. It was small and sleek, built with a design philosophy that seemed familiar, yet alien. The ship appeared to be conducting survey operations, scanning the planets, and taking readings. Captain Relvan ordered his communications officer to establish contact. This was standard procedure when encountering unknown vessels. The alien ship did not respond to any hails. It ignored every frequency the Krelith tried. Instead, it began accelerating away from the Dominion fleet. The speed readings made no sense. The vessel accelerated past light speed, using a drive system that left no conventional signature. Krelith sensors had never recorded anything like it. Before Relvan could order pursuit, the ship vanished completely. It had jumped to faster-than-light travel using technology that shouldn't exist. But the alien vessel did something else before it left. It transmitted a tight beam message toward the galactic core. The message was brief and encrypted. Krelith communications specialists couldn't break the code, but they could track its destination. The message was sent to a region of space far beyond the portal network, deep into unexplored territory. Someone out there now knew about the Krelith presence in the sealed sectors. Relvan immediately reported the encounter to High Command. The description of the vessel troubled those few who remembered the ancient database. The design philosophy matched human engineering principles. The speed capabilities were consistent with theoretical human technology. Counselor Dravix ordered increased military presence in the portal network. If there were advanced species out here with technology worth salvaging, the Dominion wanted to find them first. 3 cycles passed. The Krelith reinforced their colonies and deployed more warships through the portal. Sensor networks were established at the edges of colonized systems. The military remained on high alert, waiting for the alien vessel to return, but nothing happened. The systems remained quiet. Dravix began to relax, thinking perhaps the encounter had been with some isolated explorer who wanted nothing to do with the Krelith. Then they arrived. The detection came from Portal Station 7, the outermost Krelith installation. Sensors picked up massive gravity signatures at the system's edge. 5 vessels emerged from FTL travel in perfect formation. They were unlike anything in Dominion databases. The ships were angular and efficient, built for function rather than beauty. They moved with precise coordination that suggested either telepathic communication or computer systems far beyond Krelith capabilities. The 5 vessels took up positions that controlled every exit vector from the system. It was a textbook military maneuver, executed with flawless timing. No ship could leave the system without passing through their firing lines. The Krelith garrison went to battle stations immediately. But before anyone could fire, a transmission came through on all frequencies. The message was in perfect Krelith, with no accent or errors. A human face appeared on every screen in the system. The man wore a dark uniform with rank insignia that suggested high military authority. His expression was calm and professional. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. He identified himself as Captain Ryan Mitchell of the United Earth Coalition vessel Valiant. He stated that the Krelith were in violation of sealed space. He referenced the Exodus Accords and the terms agreed upon 12,000 cycles ago. He gave the Dominion 30 standard hours to evacuate all personnel and equipment through the portal. Captain Mitchell's final words were delivered without emotion or threat. He simply stated that failure to comply would result in the use of force. Then, the transmission ended. The 5 human vessels held their positions, waiting. The humans had returned, and they expected the Krelith to leave. Counselor Dravix faced the decision of his life: surrender the colonies or fight. Counselor Dravix stood in the council chamber staring at the message from Captain Ryan Mitchell. The human's face was still displayed on the central screen. That calm, professional expression infuriated him. These humans appeared from nowhere after 12,000 cycles and expected the Krelith to simply abandon thriving colonies. Millions of Dominion citizens lived in the portal network now. The economy depended on resources extracted from those systems. Dravix had built his political career on the success of the colonies. He could not, would not, simply give it all up. High Counselor Zephyrim urged immediate evacuation. He reminded Dravix and the assembled counselors about the ancient warnings. The humans had specifically told everyone to not be here when they returned. They had sealed the portals with clear messages about consequences. The Krelith had ignored those warnings, and now faced exactly what the humans had promised. Zephyrim argued that pride was no reason to risk war with a species whose full capabilities remained unknown, but Dravix refused to back down. He pointed out that the Dominion had 20 warships in the portal network, with more arriving daily. The humans had sent only 5 vessels. Yes, their ships appeared advanced, but they were outnumbered 4-1. The Krelith had reverse-engineered weapons from abandoned human technology. They understood the principles behind human engineering. Dravix convinced himself, and the majority of counselors, that the Dominion could win this confrontation. Captain Relvan received his orders aboard the Dominion's Pride. He was to engage the human vessels if they did not withdraw. Relvan felt confident in his fleet's abilities. His ships were equipped with the best weapons Krelith science could produce. His crews were well-trained and experienced. 20 ships against 5 seemed like favorable odds. Still, something about the human formation troubled him. They had positioned themselves with mathematical precision. Every angle was covered, every escape route blocked. It showed planning and tactical awareness that suggested extensive military experience. The 30-hour deadline approached. Counselor Dravix composed a response to Captain Mitchell. He stated that the Krelith Dominion recognized no ancient claims to these systems. The sectors had been abandoned for 12,000 cycles. By galactic law, abandoned territory was open to settlement. The Dominion had established lawful colonies and would defend them. He demanded that the human vessels withdraw immediately or be destroyed. It was a gamble based on the assumption that 5 ships could not possibly defeat 20. Captain Mitchell's reply came within minutes. His expression remained unchanged, still calm and professional. He said only 3 words: "So be it." Then, the transmission ended. The human ships began moving. Their formation shifted with perfect coordination. They accelerated toward the Krelith fleet at speeds that made Relvan's tactical officers recalculate their approach vectors 3 times. The numbers seemed impossible, but the sensors did not lie. The humans were moving faster than any ships in Dominion records. Relvan gave the order to open fire. 20 Krelith warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Energy beams and missiles filled the space between the fleets. It was enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The human ships did not attempt to evade. They simply activated their defensive systems. Translucent barriers of energy appeared around each vessel. The Krelith weapons struck these shields and dissipated harmlessly. Not a single shot penetrated to the hulls beneath. Then the humans returned fire. Their weapons were nothing like what the Krelith had reverse-engineered from abandoned technology. These were active military systems, refined by 12,000 cycles of human development. The beams that lanced from human ships carved through Krelith shields as if they were not there. The first Dominion warship exploded within seconds. The second lost power and began drifting. The third tried to maneuver away, but found its engines disabled by some form of targeted energy pulse. The battle lasted 17 minutes. It was the most one-sided engagement in Krelith military history. The human ships moved through the Dominion fleet like predators among prey. They anticipated every Krelith maneuver. They countered every tactic. Their weapons struck with surgical precision, targeting specific systems rather than simply destroying everything. Captain Relvan watched in horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. Ships he had commanded for years were reduced to drifting hulks in less time than it took to eat a meal. The human vessels demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible. They accelerated and turned at speeds that should have crushed their crews. Their shields absorbed damage, that would have vaporized Krellith ships. Their weapons hit targets from distances Dominion sensors could barely detect. But what truly terrified Relvan was the coordination. The 5 human ships moved as one entity. They knew exactly where each other would be at any moment. Their firing patterns interlocked into zones of absolute lethality that no Krellith ship could survive. Of the 20 Dominion warships, only 3 survived. And they survived only because the humans deliberately let them live. Captain Mitchell's vessels disabled their weapons and engines, but left life support systems intact. They crippled the ships without killing the crews. It was a calculated mercy that somehow made the defeat more humiliating. The humans could have destroyed everything. Instead, they chose to demonstrate restraint even while proving their overwhelming superiority. Captain Mitchell's final transmission was broadcast to every Krellith installation in the portal network. His calm, professional demeanor had not changed despite the battle. He stated that this had been the only warning the Krellith would receive. All Dominion personnel and equipment must evacuate within 10 standard days. After that deadline, human forces would reclaim their territory by any means necessary. He emphasized that this engagement involved only a tiny fraction of human military capability. The main fleet was returning and would arrive soon. He suggested that the Krellith not be present when that happened. The transmission ended with the human ships jumping to FTL travel. They vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The 3 surviving Krellith vessels limped back through the portal, carrying news of the catastrophic defeat. Captain Relvan sat in his damaged command chair trying to understand what had happened. His fleet had been confident, well-armed, and experienced. The humans had destroyed them in 17 minutes, with contemptuous ease. If 5 ships could do that, what could a full fleet accomplish? News of the battle reached the Dominion homeworld within hours. The carefully edited footage showed Krellith warships being torn apart by weapons they could not counter. It showed human vessels moving with impossible speed and precision. Most disturbing were the final shots of disabled Dominion ships drifting in space. Their crews alive, but helpless. The humans had proven they could destroy the Krellith fleet whenever they wanted. They had chosen mercy instead, and that made them infinitely more terrifying. Panic spread through the colonies. Families began evacuating immediately, not waiting for official orders. Ships crowded the portal, desperate to escape before the 10-day deadline expired. Councillor Dravix tried to maintain order, issuing statements about negotiation and diplomatic solutions. But his words rang hollow after such a decisive military defeat. The colonists had seen what human weapons could do. They had no intention of staying to face the main fleet. High Councillor Zephyrim called an emergency session of the full council. He did not waste time with recriminations or blame. The situation was clear. The humans had returned as they promised. They had proven their military superiority beyond any doubt. The Krellith had 2 choices: evacuate peacefully or face annihilation when the main human fleet arrived. Zephyrim urged immediate withdrawal from all colonies in the portal network, but Councillor Dravix could not accept defeat. His entire political career was built on the success of those colonies. Abandoning them meant admitting he had been wrong. It meant acknowledging that he had ignored ancient warnings and led the Dominion into disaster. His pride would not allow such an admission. Instead, he argued that the 5 human ships represented their entire military force. He claimed they were bluffing about a larger fleet. He insisted the Dominion could still hold its colonies with sufficient military commitment. Dravix contacted the Vren Collective, the Torth Hierarchy, and the Ossian Republic. These allied civilizations had their own interests in the portal network. They had sent colonists and established mining operations alongside the Krellith. Dravix convinced them that the human threat endangered everyone's investments. He painted a picture of human aggression and territorial ambition. He warned that if the humans reclaimed these sectors, they might expand further into known space. Together, the allied civilizations could field hundreds of warships. Surely that would be enough to counter 5 human vessels. The allied species agreed to commit military forces. They had invested heavily in the portal colonies, and were reluctant to abandon those investments without a fight. Within 20 days, a combined fleet of 300 warships assembled at the primary portal. It was the largest military force ever gathered in known space. Representatives from 4 different civilizations stood together, united in their determination to hold the portal network against human claims. Counselor Dravix took personal command of the combined fleet. He saw this as his chance for redemption. He would lead 300 ships through the portal and establish overwhelming military presence around the colonies. When the humans arrived, they would face impossible odds. They would have to negotiate or face destruction. Dravix convinced himself that the humans would back down when faced with such force. After all, they had shown mercy to defeated Krelith crews. That suggested they wanted to avoid casualties. Surely, they would choose negotiation over a battle they could not win. The combined fleet crossed through the portal in waves. 300 warships, representing 4 different civilizations, deployed into defensive formations around the Krelith colonies. Counselor Dravix stood on the command deck of the flagship Dominion's Glory, watching the deployment with satisfaction. Sensor networks were established throughout the occupied systems. Fighter squadrons flew constant patrols. Supply lines were secured. Every ship stood at battle stations, ready for the human fleet that Captain Mitchell had promised would come. The colonists had not all evacuated despite the approaching deadline. Many had chosen to stay, convinced that the massive military presence would protect them. Dravix had encouraged this, needing the colonies to remain populated to justify the military deployment. He broadcast messages assuring everyone that the combined fleet could handle any threat. The humans had won 1 battle against 20 surprised ships. They would not fare so well against 300 prepared warships with unified command. High Counselor Zephyrim had made one final plea for evacuation before the fleet departed. He argued that the Krelith were repeating the same mistake that led to the first defeat. They were assuming they understood human capabilities based on limited information. The ancient database showed a civilization capable of fighting wars across multiple galaxies. Captain Mitchell had specifically warned that his 5 ships represented only a tiny fraction of human military strength. Perhaps the warning should be taken seriously, but Dravix had dismissed these concerns. He pointed out that 12,000 cycles had passed since the humans sealed the portals. Civilizations changed over such vast time spans. Technology advanced or declined. The humans might have regressed or split into warring factions. Even if they maintained their capabilities, 300 ships was a force that could not be ignored. The combined fleet had firepower equivalent to destroying several planets. No rational species would attack such overwhelming strength. They waited. Days passed with no sign of human vessels. Dravix began to believe his gamble had worked. The humans had seen the military buildup and decided that retaking the sectors was not worth the cost. Perhaps they would negotiate now, offering to share the portal network rather than fight over it. Dravix prepared diplomatic proposals, ready to offer the humans access to some systems in exchange for recognizing Dominion sovereignty over others. On the 7th day, the outermost sensors detected something. The readings made no sense initially. The technician, monitoring the display, thought there was a malfunction. The gravity signature was so massive, it resembled a stellar phenomenon rather than ships. But as the data resolved, the truth became clear. Ships were emerging from FTL, travel at the system's edge, dozens of them, hundreds. The sensors kept detecting new contacts, each emergence precisely coordinated with the others. The command deck fell silent as the tactical display updated. The technicians counted 147 capital ships, each one larger than the heaviest dreadnought in the combined fleet. Surrounding these massive vessels were over 1,000 smaller ships, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers. As they watched, the carriers began launching fighters. Clouds of small craft emerged from the hangar bays, numbering in the tens of thousands. And still, more ships kept arriving, jumping into the system in perfect formation. Counselor Dravix stared at the display in disbelief. This was not a fleet. This was an invasion force large enough to conquer entire sectors of space. Every ship showed power readings far beyond anything the combined fleet possessed. Their formation was mathematically perfect, showing coordination that required either a hive mind or computer systems of terrifying sophistication. The human fleet filled the sensor screens, and still more contacts appeared every minute. A communication request came from the largest human vessel. The ship dwarfed even the command carriers of the combined fleet. It was less a warship and more a mobile fortress, bristling with weapons and surrounded by defensive screens that registered as small suns on the energy detectors. Dravix accepted the transmission with shaking hands. A human appeared on the screen, wearing a dark uniform with rank insignia that marked him as someone of supreme authority. The human identified himself as Admiral Jacob Price, commander of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet of the United Earth Coalition. His voice carried the same calm professionalism that Captain Mitchell had displayed, but with an added weight of authority. He stated that this was the only communication the combined fleet would receive. The Krelith and their allies had been given warning. They had been given time to evacuate. They had chosen to ignore both. Now they would face the consequences of that choice. Admiral Price's expression never changed as he delivered this message. There was no anger, no gloating, no satisfaction. He spoke like someone reading a weather report, stating facts without emotional investment. The transmission ended. The human fleet began to advance. The formation moved as one entity, maintaining perfect spacing as thousands of ships accelerated toward the Krelith positions. The sheer scale of the movement was hypnotic. It was like watching a force of nature approach, inevitable and unstoppable. Counselor Dravix gave the order to open fire. 300 warships unleashed everything they had: energy weapons, missiles, kinetic projectiles, and exotic radiation beams filled the space between the fleets. It was more firepower than had ever been concentrated in one place in galactic history. The opening salvo should have destroyed anything in its path. The humans did not even slow down. Their shields absorbed the barrage without visible effect. The massive capital ships continued advancing, as if the combined fleet had not fired at all. Then the human fleet returned fire. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The humans had clearly studied every aspect of the combined fleet during the approach. They knew the capabilities of each ship type. They understood the tactics of each species. They had identified the command structure and communication networks. Now they exploited every weakness with surgical precision. The first wave of human fire targeted command ships and fleet coordination vessels. Within minutes, the combined fleet's unified command structure collapsed into chaos. The Krelith ships tried to maintain formation, but the Vren vessels panicked and broke ranks. The Torth attempted aggressive maneuvers that left them exposed. The Osean ships tried to retreat and created confusion in the rear formations. The humans fragmented the Allied fleet within the first hour, dividing the forces and destroying them piecemeal. Each species fought alone, unable to coordinate with their allies, picked apart by human task forces that moved with practiced efficiency. Counselor Dravix watched his fleet dissolve before his eyes. Ships he had counted on for victory were reduced to wreckage in seconds. The human weapons operated on principles that Krelith science could not explain. Some beams passed through shields as if they were not there. Others caused catastrophic systems failures without visible damage. Still others simply disabled ships, leaving them drifting and helpless. The humans fought with a level of precision that suggested they had done this many times before. But the most terrifying aspect was the restraint. Despite their overwhelming firepower, the humans targeted weapons and propulsion systems. They disabled ships rather than destroying them. Life pods that ejected from damaged vessels were allowed to escape. Colonial installations were surrounded and given chances to surrender. The humans fought like they were following strict rules of engagement, even while systematically dismantling everything the combined fleet had brought. They could have simply destroyed everything. But they chose mercy. It made their superiority even more crushing. Admiral Price's fleet divided into task forces, each assigned to specific systems in the portal network. They moved through the colonies with methodical efficiency. Krelith installations were surrounded, colonists were ordered to evacuate. Equipment was catalogued and impounded. Ancient human facilities were inspected and secured. Beacons were placed throughout the systems, broadcasting warnings in multiple languages that these sectors were now closed under human authority. The entire operation proceeded with military precision that allowed no resistance. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted 15 days. By the end, every Krelith and allied presence in the portal network had been eliminated. Not destroyed, but removed. The humans had carefully evacuated millions of colonists, transported them back through the portal, and ensured their safe return to their home systems. The only casualties were those who died in the initial fleet engagement, and even those numbers were surprisingly low. The humans had disabled most ships before their crews could be killed. Counselor Dravix sat in the remains of his flagship, surrounded by disabled systems and emergency lighting. His grand fleet of 300 ships had been reduced to drifting wrecks in less time than some wars lasted. The humans had not just defeated them, they had demonstrated such overwhelming superiority that further resistance was meaningless. 300 ships against thousands, and the outcome had never been in doubt. The humans had toyed with them, showing mercy when they could have shown annihilation. The final confrontation came at the portal itself. Dravix refused to retreat through the gateway, his flagship holding position even as damaged systems failed around him. He demanded to speak with Admiral Price to understand what had happened. The Admiral appeared on the screen, his expression still calm. Dravix asked the question that haunted him. Why had the humans left 12,000 cycles ago if they were this powerful? Price's answer would reshape how the galaxy understood humanity's place among the stars. Admiral Jacob Price looked at Counselor Dravix through the viewscreen. The Krelith counselor sat in a damaged command chair, surrounded by failing systems and emergency lighting. His flagship was crippled, his fleet destroyed, his ambitions shattered. Price had seen this moment many times before in his long career. The moment when someone realized they had made a catastrophic mistake. The moment when pride gave way to the desperate need to understand what had gone wrong. Dravix asked why the humans had left if they were so powerful. It was a reasonable question from someone who could not comprehend why any civilization would voluntarily give up such military superiority. Price decided the Krelith deserved an honest answer. They had been warned. They had ignored the warning. But perhaps understanding why the warning existed would help prevent future conflicts. Price explained that 12,000 cycles ago, humanity had fought a war that almost destroyed the galaxy. The enemy, called the Devourers, had threatened every sentient species. Humanity joined a coalition of civilizations to stop them. The war lasted over 200 years. Billions died. Entire star systems were sterilized. The fighting was brutal beyond description. And humanity had proven very, very good at war. When the Devourers were finally defeated, the coalition turned on itself. Old rivals sought advantage. Species that had fought together became enemies, and humanity found itself at war again. This time against former allies. The humans won those conflicts too. Their military had been forged in the fires of the longest war in galactic history. They had weapons that could crack planets, ships that could destroy fleets, tactics refined through centuries of combat. They were, quite simply, the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. But then humanity looked at what they had become. They saw the fear in the eyes of other species. They counted the dead on both sides of every conflict. They realized that being good at war had cost them something essential. They had become defined by their ability to destroy rather than their capacity to create. The victory over the Devourers felt hollow when measured against what they had lost in achieving it. So, humanity made a choice. The human governments convened and created the Exodus Accords. They would withdraw from the war-torn sectors through their portal network. They would seal the gateways behind them with clear warnings. They would return to their home galaxies and rebuild not just their civilization, but their values. They needed time to remember what they were fighting for instead of just how to fight. They needed to become more than weapons. Price told Dravigs that the warnings carved on the portals were not threats. They were kindnesses. The humans knew what would happen if younger civilizations entered the sealed sectors. They knew the ancient weapons and technologies left behind would be tempting. They knew that some species would ignore the warnings and establish colonies, so they were very specific in their message. Do not be here when we return. It was a courtesy, giving everyone time to leave before humanity came back. The Admiral's expression hardened as he continued. Humanity had spent 12,000 cycles rebuilding. They had not forgotten their military capabilities. Instead, they had refined them, improved them, and placed them under strict ethical guidelines. The Third Expeditionary Fleet was not their most powerful force. It was simply the first wave, sent to reclaim the sealed sectors and establish control. Behind them came colony ships, research vessels, and diplomatic corps. Humanity was returning not as conquerors, but as the rightful inhabitants of their territory. Draviks asked why the humans had shown such restraint during the battles. If they were so powerful, why disable ships instead of destroying them? Why evacuate colonies instead of simply eliminating them? Price's answer was simple. Because humanity had learned from their mistakes. The species that fled through the portals 12,000 cycles ago would have destroyed the Krelith fleet without mercy. The humans who returned had remembered that their strength should be used to protect, not to terrorize. But Price made one thing absolutely clear. The restraint humanity showed was a choice, not a weakness. The Krelith and their allies had been given every opportunity to evacuate peacefully. They had chosen to fight instead. Now, they understood the consequences. The sealed sectors belonged to humanity by ancient right and current force. Any future violations would be met with the same response. The humans would not negotiate their territory. They would not share their systems. They would enforce the boundaries they had established 12,000 cycles ago. The Admiral gave Draviks a choice. The Krelith could withdraw peacefully and accept a peace treaty. In exchange for respecting human boundaries, humanity would share some medical and agricultural technologies as reparations for Krelith lives lost in the conflict. Or the Krelith could continue fighting, and humanity would remind the galaxy why their warnings were carved in 17 languages across 3 galaxies. Price's tone made clear which option he expected the counselor to choose. Draviks looked at the tactical display showing the human fleet. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of support vessels, and tens of thousands of fighters. Barely scratched, despite the massive battle. Behind them, sensors detected more ships arriving. Colony vessels, construction ships, science vessels. The humans were not raiding the sealed sectors. They were reclaiming them permanently. Fighting further was not just futile. It was suicide. The counselor gave the order to withdraw. The surviving Krelith ships limped back through the portal, carrying the survivors and the news of absolute defeat. Draviks knew his political career was over. He had ignored ancient warnings, led the Dominion into disaster, and caused the deaths of thousands. He would face trial and disgrace. But at least his people would survive. The humans had proven they could destroy the Krelith utterly. Instead, they had offered peace. Back in Krelith space, the Dominion dissolved into chaos. The government that had supported the colonies fell apart. Draviks was arrested and charged with criminal negligence. High Counselor Zephyrim worked desperately to negotiate a lasting peace with the humans. The treaty was signed within 60 days. The Krelith would respect the sealed sectors. In exchange, humanity provided medical technology that cured diseases which had plagued the Dominion for generations. They shared agricultural methods that increased food production by 40%. It was generous. Far more generous than the Kralith deserved after violating human territory. The psychological impact of humanity's return echoed throughout known space. Every civilization had believed themselves alone, the inheritors of a dead universe. Ancient ruins and abandoned technologies suggested that powerful civilizations had once existed, but they were assumed to be extinct. The sudden appearance of humanity shattered those assumptions. The galaxy's history was deeper and more dangerous than anyone imagined. Other species tested human boundaries in the cycles that followed. Some sought alliances, offering trade and cultural exchange. Others confronted the humans militarily, convinced they could succeed where the Kralith had failed. The outcome was always the same. Humanity had spent 12,000 cycles preparing for their return. They had rebuilt their civilization on the lessons learned from their greatest war. They had no intention of repeating old mistakes or allowing others to exploit their territory. The portal network remained sealed under human control. Fleets rotated through, from a civilization that apparently spanned multiple galaxies beyond the known rim. The humans established embassies in major galactic capitals, offering limited trade and diplomatic relations. But they made clear that their territory was not negotiable. The sealed sectors would remain sealed. Any violations would be met with overwhelming force tempered by mercy, but force nonetheless. Commander Vex'Lar retired after the failed colonial venture. He moved to a quiet research station, far from the political chaos consuming the Dominion. In his final cycles, he wrote a memoir about the discovery of the portal and everything that followed. The book became famous across Kralith space and was eventually translated into dozens of galactic languages. Its final passage was studied in military academies and diplomatic schools throughout known space. Vex'Lar wrote about finding the warning carved into the portal. He described how the Dominion had dismissed it as an empty threat from a dead civilization. He explained how pride and ambition had led them to ignore clear warnings from a species they did not understand. He detailed the battles and the crushing defeats that followed, and he offered a conclusion that became a proverb among younger civilizations. Some warnings are not threats, he wrote. They are kindnesses from those who have survived what you have not yet faced. The humans did not have to warn us. They could have returned without notice and reclaimed their territory without mercy. But they gave us a chance, 12,000 cycles ago, to not be there when they came back. We should have listened. Perhaps the greatest wisdom is knowing when to heed a warning, even from ruins, even from the past. Especially from those who have been through fire and emerged stronger. The galaxy learned that lesson the hard way. The humans had uncovered a truth that most civilizations never realized. Real strength was not just the capacity to destroy, but the wisdom to show restraint. Humanity had withdrawn 12,000 cycles ago because they understood they had become too dangerous. They returned, having learned to balance their power with purpose. They were not the desperate refugees who fled through the portals. They were something far more formidable. A civilization that had mastered both war and peace. The portals remained sealed, their warnings updated in fresh letters. The message was the same, but with one crucial change. Where once it said the human fleet would return, now it stated the human fleet had returned and was watching. The threat was no longer in the future. It was present, active, and eternal. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of assuming an ancient warning was meaningless. Commander Vex'Lar finished his memoir with a final observation. The Kralith had found a ruined portal and read its warning. They had not believed the human fleet would return. They had been wrong. And the galaxy would spend the next 1,000 cycles learning to live with the consequences of that mistake. Some lessons could only be learned through experience. Some warnings could only be understood after they came true. And some civilizations needed to face overwhelming power before they understood that wisdom was more valuable than strength. The humans had returned. The galaxy had been forever changed. And on every portal across 3 galaxies, the warning stood as a reminder that some things should not be disturbed, some boundaries should not be crossed, and some warnings should always be heeded. The age of thinking humanity was extinct had ended. The age of understanding humanity's place in the galactic order had begun, and it would never be forgotten.